Billy Carson and Graham Hancock unveil their enthralling experiences and stories about alien encounters challenging our understanding of reality.
They are these beings that came from off-world.
So these are aliens?
These are aliens.
UFOs, the mysterious spaceships from other planets, hold secrets that Billy and Graham are determined to unravel.
I basically said, is this ancient aliens you're talking about? Are those spaceships that have come from other planets? And he said, no. Those are vehicles for entering and leaving the spirit world.
Back then, I don't believe we had the technology to create an ARV, an alien reproduction vehicle. I think what I saw was probably a real UFO.
Wow. Are you the first black guy to see a UFO?
No, I'm not the first black guy.
Bonnie Hill. The first black man to witness an alien was abducted along with his wife, marking a pivotal moment in extraterrestrial history.
Barney Hill was a black guy who came out, I think it was in the 60s or 70s, about his abduction situation with him and his wife. And him and his wife were abducted, and they gave an account of what these beings showed them as where they came from. And nobody knew where the Zeta Reticuli star system was at that time. It didn't exist in our star map.
The discovery of Zeta Reticulus, revealed by the alien that abducted Bonnie Hill, adds another layer to the cosmic enigma.
Later on, it came out, a person says, wait a minute, and they put it together and said, this is Zeta Reticulus. We found this star system now. Now we know where they say they were from. Pretty interesting. The Anunnaki, they are these beings that came from off-world.
So these are aliens?
These are aliens.
Graham Hancock claims we are exploring realms of reality beyond the ordinary reach of our senses, urging us to expand our consciousness.
But we don't know that, and Rick is open to the possibility that we are dealing with areas of reality that are not normally accessible to our senses, and that become accessible to our senses by retuning the receiver wavelength of the brain, which is what he suggests DMT does. And I think that's very plausible. And at the very least, those who are interested in UFOs and aliens should be also investigating this line of inquiry.
He poses a profound question. Can altered states of consciousness help us grasp the universe's majestic complexity?
Can we use changes in consciousness to understand the majestic complexity of the universe in which we live? And I think the answer is definitely yes. And many of Rick's volunteers, I paraphrase, but they came back with reports that the entities who'd encountered them said, "We are so glad you've discovered this technology. Now we can communicate with you much more easily." You know, it's fascinating. So there's a technology for encountering other intelligences. And against that, this mechanistic, simplistic alien meme that's going around now that they're a bit like us, but they came here in higher tech, it's dull by comparison.
Billy Carson dismisses the stereotype of aliens as little green men with antennae, asserting they are actually hominids.
Now, what's interesting about these aliens is that they're not little green men with antenna. They're actually hominids, bilateral bipedal hominids. They look just like us.
Okay.
You slice them in half. They have two forward-facing looking eyes, two hands, legs. They put their pants on one leg at a time like us.
But do they look more like us or more like us?
He boldly states that humans resemble these aliens because we carry their genetic material within us.
We look like them.
Okay.
We actually look like them.
Okay.
And the reason why is because we have their genetics and their DNA inside of our bodies. Now, what's interesting is these beings were a spacefaring race that broke away from the Pleiadian star system. The Pleiadian star system is a group of stars called the Seven Sisters in the night sky. You can see 6 stars with the naked eye.
According to ancient texts and tablets, there was a galactic conflict among the stars in ancient times, a testament to.
Now, these stars in ancient times, according to ancient texts and tablets, there was an ancient galactic war there.
Okay.
Most of the information from Star comes from this text. And they had these destroyers like stars. They don't call them that, but they call them the Brahma Astra and Brahma Astra Honda weapons that actually can release a weapon that can destroy planets.
Okay.
Imagine if you were in a star system and a planet is being blown up and you're in a nearby planet. You got to off of your planet.
Yeah.
This created something called space refugees.
Billy clarifies that the term Anunnaki is a general term, not limited to one race, broadening our understanding of ancient alien influences.
And so some of them came to Earth. And so Anunnaki is a general term. It doesn't mean one race. It's just like if all of us here got in a spaceship and flew to Mars and we met a Martian and he said, "Who are you guys?" We'd say Earthlings.
Got it. But they maybe would call us Anunnaki.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm Billy Carson from Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah.
Right. So they would get, they're Earthlings. That's one term, but we're all different races here.
Right.
Right. So, but Anunnaki is a term to say those who came from heaven to earth. That's it. In Africa, they call it the Nituru, which means the same exact thing. The gods that came from heaven to earth and turned mud into a kingdom. Now, the civilization they built is the Atlantean civilization.
Hey, tell me, what happened?
So 2010, I came home. I was working on this big project called Fort Terra Nova, which I built. And Fort Terra Nova was on the History Channel, a Countdown to Apocalypse, the Nostradamus episode. And anyway, so I was working on this project. I come home, I'm looking at ESPN, and I'm looking at sports. About 9 o'clock p.m. All the lights turn dim, the TV turns off, and I thought my kids were playing a trick on me because they lived up in the room behind me, up on the second floor. And I look up, and there's nobody there. When I turn around, there were these two beings right there.
He recounts his own harrowing confrontation with an alien that entered his house. A tale that captivates and terrifies.
But they didn't look like they were real eyes. They looked like coverings of some type. And they didn't communicate with me through any kind of telepathy that I could tell, but I felt like my brain was shaking in my skull to the point where it started hurting, and I started screaming, but no sound was coming out of my throat. I could feel the air coming out, but I couldn't hear it myself.
And you were awake during this period? You weren't taking a nap or anything like that?
Taking a nap, no psychedelics.
Of course, yeah.
And my whole house, everyone was in. My wife at the time, my ex-wife was in the bedroom right behind the next wall. My girls were in that side of the house, a split floor plan. My boys were in that side of the house. The house was full of people. Nobody heard us or anything. I was screaming. A few seconds later, it stops, and they turn around, and they don't walk like a person. They kind of dangle. So they kind of dangled away, and they went right through the wall. And then, boom, the TV comes back. The lights come back to normal color. And that's when I went running around the house, and it was just traumatic for everybody, and it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. There was other reasons why, but, I ended up my one son, Giovanni, he's told me I'm scared to even come around you. And still to this day, he rarely ever calls me or comes around. It's kind of like I lost my son. I made no money off of this. I got no exposure off of this. That's why I kept it quiet for so long. Lost my family, created a lot of dissension. I remember we were on a highway one day, and my wife was driving at the time, my ex-wife, and she slammed on the brakes, and, it was like, just get out of the car, because it was the kids were scared. And I was like, I'm sticking to my story. I'm not changing my story because this really happened to me. And they just didn't want to hear it. But her parents were Jehovah's Witnesses. So everything was of the devil, and so it was a pretty traumatic experience. It took a long time to talk about it. The only reason why I came out with that information was because I started running into a lot of people at conferences that would come up to me and tell me that they were having these experiences. They were horrified to talk about them. So I felt like if I would talk about it, I would give them strength for them to have expressed themselves and walk in their truth and believe in their experience that they had.
Graham argues that physical aliens arriving in spaceships is a materialist notion.
I think that the physical aliens coming here in spaceships or flying saucers from other planets is fundamentally it's a materialist proposition. It's about tech and about material things.
It's like the Elon Musk worldview. It's not the consciousness worldview.
It's not a consciousness worldview. What was striking to me was a conversation I had with the late Pablo Amaringo, an Amazonian shaman, who painted his visions after he'd been on the ayahuasca journey. He would sit down and paint. He created thousands of beautiful, beautiful paintings. And in many of those paintings, there are flying saucers. So I said to Pablo, is this, I basically said, is this ancient aliens you're talking about? Are those spaceships that have come from other planets? And he said, no, those are vehicles for entering and leaving the spirit world. And when a shaman talks about the spirit world, that shaman is talking about what quantum physicists would call a parallel dimension or a parallel realm. And I'm not denying that there are physical elements to the UFO experience. There certainly are. They do show up in radar traces here and there. There are physical elements to it, but exactly what they are is not yet clear.
Yeah.
Are they, as Pablo said, vehicles for entering and leaving, let's put it in modern language, a parallel realm, a parallel universe, rather than vehicles to take us across interstellar space in this universe? And then you come down to the consciousness issue. You come down to the fact, and I document this at length in Supernatural.
Billy provides vivid descriptions of alien facial structures, highlighting the uncanny similarities to human features.
That's horrifying, more like a clown. It's like the big overhead, right? When it kind of goes out like this. Yeah. No, it wasn't like that. It was more like the, almost like the ones you see in the movies, which means it told me right away that these movie directors or whoever's writing these movies, they know what these people
not
look
like that.
You see how it's big? His head is more like a big out like that with a big brow in the front. It didn't look like that, no. But that doesn't mean that he didn't see that. I mean, there's so many different people that exist in the universe. They didn't really have on what looked like clothes to me. They weren't really gray. They were almost like brownish, but they had very big eyes, 2 little tiny dots for a nose, a slit for a mouth. They never opened the mouth. They never opened. They never moved at all. They didn't even shake. There was no facial movements. I couldn't discern if they were even real or not real, or in terms of like being something that was flesh. But their hands were very long and dangly like you see on TV, I swear to you. And I was just like completely shocked. Now, 2 things happened to me after this situation. The first thing was, of course, I scared the hell out of everybody. The second thing was I kept hearing this voice in my head over and over again. Worldwide telescope, worldwide telescope, worldwide telescope, over and over and over.
The phenomenology of encounters with spirits by shamans, documented in ancient cave art.
We have the same phenomenology in encounters with spirits by shamans, documented in cave art going back tens of thousands of years. We have that phenomenology in encounters with fairies and elves in the Middle Ages, and we have the identical phenomenology in encounters with aliens today. And I think it's obvious. We're looking at the same experience through time, construed through different cultural lenses.
Do you think Gnostic or Kabbalistic traditions have attempted to make deliberate contact? So
I think any tradition that makes use of psychedelics, whether they want to or not, are going to make deliberate contact. I mean, I had on one of my early ayahuasca journeys in the Amazon, I had a typical alien encounter. And I was sitting on a bench outside the shaman's hut, feeling pretty ill, because that's what ayahuasca does with you. And I was having these wild visions. And then I saw not one, but several flying saucers up above me. And I saw this characteristic alien face, this sort of heart-shaped, large, dark eyes, materialize up there. And I got the very strong message that they were going to take me away. We're going to take you. And that's where I was a coward. Because I was seeing these things with my eyes closed, and you can often stop visions by opening your eyes. And I opened my eyes and I shouted, "No!"
A shocking research at Imperial College explores psychedelics to understand the phenomenology of these extraordinary experiences.
There's a really important project going on at Imperial College in London. And this is the first time that psychedelics have been trialed with human volunteers, not to see what the therapeutic benefit is, but to understand the phenomenology. And DMT is particularly effective in bringing about entity encounters. Terence McKenna's machine elves, for example. What's happening at Imperial College is that they found a way to keep people in the DMT state for an hour. Normally it's 10 to 15
intravenous?
minutes. Yes, an intravenous drip. And they keep them in a steady DMT state for an hour. And while doing that, they put them in MRI scanners and they interview them, they talk to them to the extent that they're able to talk. And quite often, with a full-blown DMT journey, you are not able to talk until afterwards. But because they're in the journey for an hour, they're able to process the experience much more effectively than if you're in the journey for 10 minutes. And this is really serious work that's being done at Imperial College. It's being done with large numbers of volunteers.
This is Christopher Timmerman?
Chris Timmerman is the head of the project. Yeah. He's the guy who runs that project, and many other scientists working with him on that project. And they will sit with the volunteers through the whole hour and talk to them. And particularly what they want to know is about entities. What entities are you encountering? Now, some might say, what's the use of this? But I say it's incredibly useful because what they're doing is they're exploring the DMT realm. And these are like early explorers from our time, who went out into the wilderness and came back with stories about what they'd seen. These volunteers are going out into the DMT wilderness and coming back with stories of what they've seen. And the stories are remarkably consistent, that they're encountering the same entities in the same setting. And normally, when large number of people agree on the same experience, we're inclined to define that experience as real. And it's only the prejudices of our civilization that lead us to dismiss it as unreal or as mere hallucinations.
Billy's quest for anomalies led him to delve into the mysteries of ancient civilizations, uncovering secrets long forgotten.
And I was like, what the hell is this? And the more I looked, the more of these anomalies I kept seeing. So it led me down a whole rabbit hole into anomaly hunting. That anomaly hunting got me into researching these ancient civilizations. That's how it happened. That's literally how it happened. So because of that experience, I became an expert in ancient civilizations, literally. That's how I got into it.
And do you feel, is this an example of the...
Yeah, that's the spirit rover right there on the upper left. And there's a lot of anomalies. We've documented so many crazy anomalies over the years. And I can send you some if you want to pop them in there. Just some crazy stuff that made CNN, that made CNBC, Fox News. A lot of our stuff has been featured in the news. We've downloaded over 1 million of these panoramas from the space agencies, and we've now documented over 60,000 anomalies. Things that don't belong there. Human beings are an abandoned seed colony on this planet. And we have had some influence due to people violating what I would call a prime directive. We've been engaged in a way that we weren't supposed to be engaged, and we've been given technologies that have sped us up far past where we should be right now, including here, this AI thing is coming, right? And that's no oversight, no nothing, and it's just being unleashed on us. Again, more advancement in the blink of an eye that we're not ready for, spiritually or consciously.
He firmly believes that there are watchers and observers out there, monitoring and influencing our world, a concept that invites both awe and fear, and unease.
And it put us in a predicament. And I believe that there are people out there that are watching us, I do mean people, that are watching us and observing us to see when we're gonna go from being babies that are learning how to crawl, to learning how to walk, to learning how to run, to being adolescents, to even then becoming and consciously in the spirit to becoming full-grown adults. I think that mankind is a baby learning how to crawl. And every now and then when a baby learns how to crawl, it plops down on its stomach, right? Because it has to get the strength. We've plopped down on our stomach a few times. Those will be some of the hiccups in our civilization right now. Eventually, we will grab onto the edge of a table and pull ourselves up and start taking steps.
What are the hiccups?
Hiccups, racism, inquisitions, religion,
maybe
atomic technologies that we're not ready for. All these things are the hiccups, right? Police brutality. My dad was killed by police, And so all these things, you look at it, and from a perspective of right now, it looks like things are getting worse. But it's actually the greatest time to be alive.
Mm-hmm.
There's no bubonic plague. There's no black plague. There's no Spanish flu. Those things almost wiped out human beings.
Yeah.
There's no papal inquisitions. There's no American Holocaust, which nobody talks about. 111 million indigenous natives of the Americas in 70 years. Nobody talks about that, but that happened, right? And so that's not happening right. I can go outside. You can go outside. We don't see laid all over the street right now. Now, are there things going on like in Iran and all these other things? Yes. But overall, on a mass consensus, it's the greatest time to be alive.
Yeah.
And so we're at the stage now where we have an opportunity to grab onto the edge of the table and pull ourselves up and begin to take those first steps. But after we take that step, what's going to happen? We're going to fall and we're going to cry. But when the challenge is when we pull ourselves back up, how long will it take for us to get a good walking gait? What is the definition of walking? Controlled falls. We have to learn how to control our fall. That's how you achieve a golden age. And I think that they're waiting at some point for us to see, for us to realize when we can stand up and we can start taking those steps in the right direction.
And then they give us some good shit again, or?
It's quite possible. That gives us the ability to get open communication.
They're like, okay, we trust you now.
Or we have to get to a certain level consciously before other technologies can be revealed. I mean, I don't know. I'm just guessing at this point, but I think they're waiting to see how long will 8 billion people allow 100 families to control them. I don't know. All I can tell you is what my hypothesis is.
Yeah.
And I feel that when mankind realizes that we're all bent over with a big table on our back, a playing board. When we stand up, the table falls off of our backs and the game is over. And standing up means unity, loving one another, treating you and everyone else like brother and sister, understanding that we are all just different aspects of one another, and realizing that everything is conscious. And then we get to the next level. Until then, it's going to be this whole, I'm better than you and you're better than me. You see the rap civil going on and all these crazy things going on. I mean, we have to get above and beyond that to the next level. And then humanity will really take huge strides.
I think it's important to keep in mind that these people have been very serious and played very dirty and created insane instability just to keep the dollar the global reserve currency. There's all sorts of things that are happening in Bitcoin right now that could be under that umbrella. And what's disturbing is that, you know, those same people at Adela, like the Rockefellers and the people that went on to fund the Club of Rome, have been big promoters, for example, of deindustrializing and depopulating Latin America. By creating instability and creating all sorts of, you know, other issues or policies, having them implemented across the continent. And it was actually a national security memorandum authored by Kissinger that essentially said the same thing and framed it as a national security threat. So, you know, we have to consider that this kind of stuff, you know, Adela had lots of positive PR at the time, and, you know, in Time magazine, for example, and, you know, other outlets talking about how they were doing great things for Latin American businesses. And when you look at a group like Endeavor, you know, I'm sure it is framed as positive throughout South America. But the problem is that the people that developed Endeavor, including, you know, Rottenberg and Kellner, you know, they have ties that are, as we document in the piece, are of concern. And the people that essentially supercharged Endeavor by giving them millions upon millions of dollars to become what they are now are definitely very disturbing figures. You know, mainly Piero Midyar of eBay and the Bronfman family, who, you know, have all sorts of ties to, you know, I mean, some of it we've already gone over, but there's definitely a lot more to be said about both of them. And if you look at a lot of, you know, philanthropies in general, you will see that a lot of these very controversial oligarchs, you know, are very interested in funding young global leaders. I say that because, of course, the WEF, you know, World Economic Forum Young Global Leader Program sort of became infamous in the past few years because of, you know, WEF, the outgoing chairman of the WEF, you know, Klaus Schwab saying on video that, like, you know, oh, and the Young Global Leader Program is so great because, you know, we penetrate the cabinets. And, you know, a lot of people pointed to that as being why, you know, during, like, you know, all these young global leaders were in all these different cabinets throughout the world, and that was why, you know, one of the reasons perhaps why so many countries adopted the same exact stance and policies as it related to. And Endeavor is a similar network. A lot of the people involved in creating it, also young WEF, young global leaders. So is Wences Casares. And, you know, these people aren't just in the public sector, they're also in the private sector. And Endeavor focuses expressly on the private sector in emerging markets, which, as we've discussed, you know, earlier, there's a major interest to have Latin America completely dependent on, you know, the United States and have it be, you know, financially yoked, you know, to the United States and have its, you know, resources are, you know, belong to the United States. I mean, there's people, you know, in power who have essentially said that, maybe a little more indirectly, in the past. I mean, I'm pretty sure John Bolton, for example, who was Trump's national security advisor and is a very, very much disliked neocon, has, you know, quotes to that effect about, like, you know, Latin America's ours, basically. And so, there's efforts to sort of make that happen. And I would argue that Endeavor is a way to sort of develop these corporate landscapes in a way similar to Adela, and to make it look decentralized in name only. But they share a lot of the same funding and they share a lot of the same connections. And when those powerful people at the top come to call to those entrepreneurs, they can be influenced. And I would argue again that perhaps the most important point here is that the main Endeavor-backed companies, a lot of them are based around Endeavor Argentina specifically, are becoming the dominant platforms for e-commerce and fintech and crypto use, and also Bitcoin use, obviously, on the continent, especially at a time when this, what I would argue is an engineered economic crisis in places like Argentina, decades in the making, are forcing people onto these platforms, and they're. You had someone like Milei elected expressly because he's like, I'm going to dollarize, and maybe he's not now. But stablecoins are a way to sort of get that. And these are, the dominant force here as it relates to, crypto, payment rails. So much of it is based around Mercado Libre, which is like the e-commerce giant of the entire continent, and was, one of the first Endeavor-backed companies in 1999. Now you have Marcos Galperin being a big figure, but his co-founder at Mercado Libre created Kazakh Ventures, which is he made with another Endeavor entrepreneur, and they've gone to fund thousands of startups. And all of these companies, a lot of time, it's just business sense. You're beholden to your funding a lot of the time because you don't want to lose that funding. And so they have influence with you, they have clout. And so there's a lot of different ways to influence private sector policy. And if you're looking to move, from the public to the private side of the public-private partnership, you need to have a lockdown on the private sector the same way you have it on the public sector. If you want to have, the control and power that you're seeking, you can't just ignore one whole half of that partnership, right? And so I think this is a way to create a constellation of companies. And I'm not saying all Endeavor entrepreneurs are bad or like bad people. The point is, the people at the top and the people like on the board, people like Reid Hoffman, for example, are not good, and they can exert influence on Endeavor entrepreneurs very, very easily, and on the people that own the most important critical companies for fintech in Latin America. And while a lot of these same actors, as we discussed earlier, are basically seeking to push Latin America into covert dollarization with the intent of eliminating really their financial sovereignty in a way that could have major implications for the continent. And, if Bitcoin is about like promoting freedom and banking the unbanked, like, is this, I think this is something that should be discussed. And when it comes for the internet or the financial system, they're going to make the enemy privacy. They're going to make the enemy privacy 100%. And the solution is going to be digital IDs and programmable, surveillable money. It doesn't have to be CBDCs, by the way. CBDCs, I think most people know, are going to be that, but it doesn't, it's not just CBDCs. There is a goal, there is a push from the banks themselves, some of the most powerful banks in the world, to have, at least in some countries, a different system that's not a CBDC, because with a CBDC, they can't do fractional reserve banking. And so that's what deposit tokens are all about. Tokenizing deposits, and you can make those programmable and you can surveil them. And it's really just like a CBDC, but they won't call it that. But then the bank controls all the reserves, and maybe they'll bank some of their reserves at the Fed, or whatever, but they can still do fractional reserve banking and credit creation and all of this stuff, and not actually have to keep a one-to-one peg of reserves like CBDCs or like a fiat peg stablecoin. And so there's a push for that too, at an international level. It's not just in the U.S., but it's definitely happening in the U.S. And I would argue that's one of the reasons that you have the Federal Reserve, which is again owned by Wall Street banks in the U.S., being like, we're not going to do a direct issued CBDC, and freedom advocates in the U.S. are like, yeah, the Fed's on our side because of that. No, it's not. The Fed is 100% always on the side of Wall Street banks, and Wall Street banks only don't want a CBDC because they don't want to give the Federal Reserve their power. They want to keep their power, and they want to keep doing fractional reserve banking. I don't know. I think there's a lot of people in Congress that get into Congress campaigning on certain issues, and then once they're there long enough, they backtrack completely. There's a lot of examples of that historically and currently in the U.S. for sure. So, I mean, Elizabeth Warren is garbage. The DNC got all this money, from Sam Bankman-Fried? You know, how anti-crypto are they really? I think it's they're willing to play ball and set up regulations and be the kingmakers in the crypto industry. I think there's a lot of, I think that's going to happen. And then they're going to try and nix everything that doesn't serve them. And again, financial privacy being the main thing that doesn't serve them. But they also want to give unprecedented control to the DOJ to go and contact any crypto exchange or even Tether, right? And be like, freeze these wallets. We've decided those wallets need to be frozen. You know, so that's escalating, obviously. And, you know, the whole thing that happened with Binance is like a big push towards that as well, because now Binance is basically going to have a chaperone appointed by the U.S. government, basically in charge of everything. Their chief compliance officer is a guy that used to work for, you know, the Department of Justice. There's all sorts of things. Right. That are happening in Bitcoin right now that could be under that umbrella. But when you start to have people like BlackRock being like, you know what, we actually like Bitcoin now, that's a sign to pay attention. You know what I mean?
Bitcoin is hope.
So I think people need to, in the Bitcoin space, need to be very aware that there is a fight being had right now about the future of Bitcoin. And you have to decide which side you're on. Are you going to fight for Bitcoin to be a tool of financial freedom, or are you going to allow it to be co-opted by the powers that be that it was supposedly designed to resist them and, you know, be something they can't control? Are you going to give them control of it? I mean, the answer should be no to any Bitcoiner worth respecting, in my opinion. And what's interesting is that MBS, as soon as he came to power and during the Trump administration, was very close to Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who was also, we know from emails that have since come out promoting the idea of like stable coins, like an official US dollar stable coin. He actually, I think it was like a Sam Altman blog post that he shared with Steve Mnuchin of the Treasury Department, talking about, you know, the USD coin, which, you know, this is before Circle launched USDC, but interesting. So it's very possible that these discussions were being had like some time ago, that it's not as recent as, you know, it may appear to be based on, you know, headlines that have been coming out recently. Yeah, all I really want to add to that is that it's important to keep in mind that, like, when the petrodollar system has been, you know, the standard for keeping the dollar the global, you know, or the reserve currency, the U.S. has gone to war and like millions of people to defend that. One of the likely motivations, obviously there's more than one, but one of the key ones in invading Iraq, I would argue, was the fact that Saddam Hussein, not long before the invasion, had started selling oil in euros instead of dollars and made a lot more money, showing by example to other, you know, other OPEC members that they could make more money selling in different currencies than the dollar. And then, of course, you have the case of Libya in 2011, where Gaddafi was trying to move to a gold-backed currency called the dinar and was selling that to African countries, a lot of which either use dollars or they use, French financial stuff. And that's why you had the U.S. and France essentially lead that regime change operation with devastating consequences for Libya, which used to be the safest country in Africa, then became the most dangerous, and has been cited as an example of or a reason for why, you know, immigration got so out of control in Europe after that point. So there are cases where, you know, the U.S. government, or rather U.S. empire, is willing to go to extreme lengths to defend the dollar. So the idea that they would just sit idly by and just like let dollarization happen without having some sort of plan in the works, especially knowing that they couldn't keep this going indefinitely and that the world was going to move at some point to a post-oil economy. I think it's important to keep in mind that these people have been very serious and played very dirty and created insane instability just to keep the dollar the global reserve currency, because it gives a lot of advantages just to the U.S. And I fully feel that they intend to keep those advantages, even if it means a different system. and that his real job was currency manipulation. And that's why you have like letters to heads of state being like, I want to talk to you about Jeffrey Epstein and currency stabilization, when that exact administration was developing a plan to stabilize Mexico's currency. And someone tied up in the cabal of currency traders that Epstein was in, according to like the New York Times and stuff, was the person who shorted the peso and made millions of dollars.
And Epstein visits the Clinton White House 17 times. The first time he's invited, it's by this Rubin, R-U-B-I-N, which, you know, Robert Rubin being the head of the Treasury at that time.
Well, not at that time. He was head of the National Economic Council and became head of the Treasury. But he's the first guy to invite him in, essentially. And Robert Rubin was previously head of Goldman Sachs, which has a lot of connections both to Steve Mnuchin's family, and that's where Steve Mnuchin was originally, and also to a lot of this network of billionaires that were sort of included Epstein's patron, Leslie Wexner. Sort of the group of oligarchs that Wexner associates himself with were largely responsible for the rise of people like Robert Rubin within Goldman Sachs. And Goldman Sachs has a very intimate connection with a lot of those, families in that particular group, which the Wall Street Journal named the mega group in the late 90s. And this includes the Bronfmans. So, for example, the top people, the Weinbergs, for example, who ran Goldman Sachs for a long time, were on Seagrams. They managed trusts for the Bronfman family. And things like that, along with, mob-connected figures like Lou Wasserman of MCA, who also had intelligence ties and backed, most of the main presidential candidates of the latter half of the 20th century in the United States and made Ronald Reagan's political career happen. And, someone like Steve Bannon, too, was also involved around the same time that Pierce was associating with Epstein, very involved in trying to rehabilitate Epstein's image as he was moving to reinvent himself as like a science and tech investor. Yeah. So like, why are these people making these decisions? I mean, they obviously didn't care, because even at that point in time, after his first arrest, Epstein described himself as being socially radioactive. So these are people that are just like, no, that's fine. And like, we see something useful in you and we want to help you make that rebrand. Why? I would argue it has to do with the role that Epstein played in finances. And that is also the reason, why Leslie Wexner chose him to basically run and manage all of his money. Because right before Epstein came into the Wexner circle, Wexner's tax law in the face in broad daylight, the police investigation document says that it was organized in Leslie Wexner that did it, and that Leslie Wexner is linked to organized crime. That report was destroyed, listed as unsolved, and the happened the day before the lawyer was going to testify to the IRS about unspecified tax havens. And then Epstein sweeps in and starts untangling Wexner's complicated finances at the Limited. And then you have the Limited at that time having a figure on the board named Alan Tesler, who was involved with aspects of the Promise software scandal, which is where the intelligence and the CIA essentially put a backdoor into like every security agency. And Robert Maxwell was intimately involved with that. But Alan Tesler, the architect of that, one of them was a man named Earl Bryan, and Alan Tesler was a lawyer for Earl Bryan and also on the board of the Limited and involved with all really this whole network at the same time. I mean, a lot of very weird stuff is happening in this crowd, but if you look at what they were doing, which, I do in detail in my book, it's a mix of financial and trying to dominate tech. And that's why you have like the Maxwell sisters, after Robert Maxwell, the twins, create the first search engine and things like that. And Isabel Maxwell goes on to be a major player in high-tech system. Christine Maxwell teams up with a CIA top guy for I forget, the CIO of the CIA, to develop a company called Kiliad that was basically being used after 9/11 to analyze all of this data and all of this stuff. Well, it's important to understand that there was an explicit effort to limit the discussion about Epstein, to make it just about so you don't look at anything else. Essentially, this initiative has called to begin fusing commercial banks and financial authorities, like regulators, with the national security and law enforcement agencies. This policy could not be more insane or dystopian. Making things even worse is the fact that WEFPAC, of which the Carnegie Endowment and many of the other organizations behind this policy are members, not only call for this fusion to take place, they call to do so in ways, again, that may be illegal.
A merging of commercial banks, their regulators, and the intelligence agencies is a complete nightmare scenario, but this is exactly what the World Economic Forum has come to promote as a model public-private partnership. But perhaps more critically for American citizens, this is a policy developed with the direct participation of the U.S. Federal Reserve, the FDIC, the U.S. Secret Service, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the country's most systemically important commercial banks. The establishment in this country supports these policies, and from what I can see, they have every intention of trying to make them a reality. These American federal agencies, institutions, and commercial banks are playing a major role in developing regulations that will inevitably target Bitcoin. They have made it very clear in media reports, press releases, and policy documents that they see financial privacy, the popularity of Bitcoin, and the value of Bitcoin as direct threats responsible for what they define. Yet time and again, the American people have been fleeced and looted by many of these same agencies and many of these same commercial and central banks. The big banks like HSBC can launder millions of dollars for nothing happens to them, no one goes to jail. The CIA has laundered untold millions through banks like BCCI, a bank which ran its own operation involving prepubescent kids. And again, nothing was done, no one went to jail. FTX can launder aid money supposedly destined to funnel it back as campaign contributions to the same political party, developing crypto regulations while painting Bitcoin as a national security threat. Sam Bankman-Fried was the only person arrested, and right now he's not in prison. He's in a multi-million-dollar mansion in California, about to get 10 of the 13 federal charges against him dismissed.